For those of you who don't know me, I'm Amy Campos. I teach in the interior design program here, and I coordinate the lecture series. Tonight marks the end of our lecture series this year, and we're really excited to have Katherine here for the last lecture of the year. I wanted to quickly just thank a few people who have been extremely helpful with the lecture series this year before I introduce Katherine. So I'd like to thank Antje Steinmuller, who has been our interim chair this year. Zahid Sadar, Chip Minnick, Megan Werner, Katherine Lambert, Julianne Malnick, Kat Van Cleve, Leah Wilson, Jen Sikora, and also all of the faculty and students who are continually giving me suggestions for the lecture series and help to make it better and better each year. So thank all of you. So I'm going to read an introduction for Katherine because she has many accomplishments that I want to make sure that I cover before I let her take the stage. So in addition to her role here as Associate Professor in the Interior Design and Visual Studies departments, Katherine is a founding principal of Metropolitan Architectural Practice, otherwise known as MAP, in San Francisco. Her practice and research centers around a cross-disciplinary intersection of architectural and design practices with digital and media practices, focusing on 21st century urban nomadic existence. Katherine has worked on everything from the large-scale development of an agricultural compound in Sonoma that employed pioneering sustainable construction methods in rammed earth, straw bale, water reclamation, and reclaimed lumber. That project contributed to authoring new building codes in Sonoma that address sustainable building principles for that area. She was the principal designer for the nationally acclaimed Tenderloin AIDS Resource Center, TARC, in San Francisco, which she worked on as a founding principal with FACE, her previous office before MAP. She authored Dirt Manifesto in 1993, well ahead of its time, which called the profession to prioritize sustainable practices as a basic tenet of all architectural projects. She was a consulting producer on 1,000 Square Feet, a documentary film about mid-century architect based in Los Angeles, Gregory Ain. Her projects have been widely published in journals and periodicals such as Architecture, Progressive Architecture, Architectural Record, ID, Metropolis, and Interior Design. Her work has been the recipient of numerous awards, and she has lectured nationally and internationally. Her work resides in the collections of the Banff Center for the Arts, the Canadian Center for Architecture, the other CCA, the Cooper Hewitt, the National Design Museum, Dia Foundation, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. We are also lucky to know her as an invaluable member of the faculty here. As someone, so let's welcome her to the stage. Welcome, Katherine.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Amy, for that really nice introduction, and thank you, everybody, for coming. Wow. It's really great to see all of you here, a lot of students, colleagues, alumni, and friends. So I'm really excited about tonight, and I'm really excited to show my work. So this evening, I have the rare pleasure of presenting a body of my work that spans maybe 2 decades. It explicitly addresses a number of conceptual underpinnings and sociocultural issues that have informed my practice during this period. And it's revealed itself as a rather singular personal excavation of the past and the present, one that has found itself commingling with a cast of characters in the most unexpected of ways. Of course, the entire breadth of my practice has been privileged to engage with diverse typologies of architecture and design projects, as you can see here on the screen. The whole of it has been influenced and informed by them all, and as such, I've had some difficulty, frankly, arriving at a decision of what to present this evening. So with some deliberation, and in the interest of brevity and testing your patience, I might add, I'll focus upon 1 or 2 dominant streams that have sustained my research and practice to this day. which embodies a most underplayed aspect of what has been identified as the modernist project, that being influential experimentation in architecture and design practices melded with a program for social justice and environmental concerns within spatial articulations. It's a challenging premise, one that continually tests our resolve to keep our framing ever expansive. I have long held the visceral desire to foster tenets of social awareness and change through the built environment, insisting that architecture and urban space do not exist in isolated activities solely by a formal frame. Rather, their lively existence holds a value intrinsic to our social fabric and landscape. California, where we all practice, itself has long had a cultural legacy that encourages small firms to create adventurous work. It was true for Irving Gill, Julia Morgan, Rudolf Schindler, William Wooster, as it is for their contemporaries today. Some of these firms work primarily on smaller commissions that reasonably prioritize formalist and lifestyle concerns, and are sited in locations that the public rarely sees, either single-family residences, sited in affluent zip codes, or in places where many of us here in this room might frequent, such as hip bars and restaurants and clubs. And along with the glamorized buildings of the starchitects that we all know, are readily available for our consumer consumption via media distribution, magazines, HGTV, the web, etc. This kind of attention is not necessarily harmful at all in itself, as there is much that I respect and engage with myself in residential architecture. However, it begs the question of understanding its own place. If this work speaks to luxury and fashion, it's because of its scale and the economics involved. And it is then formalist in its concerns. To deny fashion is to deny human desire, perhaps even a human need for variety and expression. What is lost in all of the brandscape is simply the fact that it is not all that there is. And occasionally we're fortunate, very fortunate, to catch a glimpse of what else there might be out there. To reduce architecture and design to only formal context impoverishes it as a discipline. We have a broader, more quixotic and difficult role, as we must make every attempt to bridge the gap between art, function, and utility, placemaking, and context. As there is more to architecture and interior design than just the simply picking or selecting the right tonality for this year's color scheme, or for finding the wall treatment for this week's newest restaurant, I'm impressed with the formidable wealth, on the one hand, of formal talent that I see all around me, and at times I'm equally formidable degree of carelessness about the larger issues with which we all engage. Formalism and stylization have come to dominate the profession, and subsequently the public's perception of architects and designers. Arguably, the issues become one of perception, both to the media of the profession and by the younger architects and interior designers themselves as to how they envision their own role and responsibilities. I was educated, arguably almost indoctrinated, frankly, with a belief system that well-considered architecture firmly held the possibility for changing lives for the better. And I fully realize the unfashionable trending of this statement in the moment. But with that said, it has always struck me that it's a little bit curious the innumerable designers were not particularly engaged with cultural, socioeconomic, and/or political issues, or if they were, somehow it wasn't convincingly realized in their work. So in the 90s, I sought to integrate this underpinning into built projects involving some of the most disenfranchised and marginalized communities within our city of San Francisco. So the first project that I want to talk about tonight is the Tenderloin AIDS Resource Center, under the initiative of the awe-inspiring Reverend Glenda Hope. As it's also known as its acronym, TARC. By the time of its completion in 1992, it was the first facility of its kind in the world. In some ways, the story that I will recall to you of this project, its innovation, complex and rich, is that it literally captivated the architectural press, being published in numerous publications when it was completed. We were astonished, frankly, as that is no small feat in and of itself, and especially for a project representative of this demographic. But I have come to realize that the backstory of this project spoke to a much larger cultural narrative, playing out with an unimaginable global impact in real time at that time. Community, and this, of course, the Tenderloin, was home to one of the most populated groups of the disenfranchised, including illegal immigrants, HIV-infected drug users, prostitutes, pimps, hustlers, and transgendered youth in the city. To call this a community at all was radical enough. But you know, the commonalities and underpinnings of timing, desperation, and necessity created by this crisis indeed formed a formidable whole from these disparate groups. The building was an abandoned medical center and storefront that at the time housed a porn studio of the infamous Mitchell brothers on O'Farrell Street, and was donated to Reverend Glenda Hope, who had recently created the Tenderloin AIDS Network. She'd been working the streets of the Tenderloin and had the first-hand knowledge of the burgeoning AIDS crisis before anyone widely recognized that sharing needles could even serve as a transmission for HIV. At the time, high-pitched uncertainties ricocheted around the nation as to why so many disparate groups were contracting the disease. So with a relative small grant from the city of $60,000 to create this center, and of which she had no idea what she could afford or accomplish, Reverend Hope approached my firm face. I remember our first meeting very well when she said, "I've got to get this up and running. Time is not on our side. I'm out there helping sick people. Can you manage this project and get it done yesterday?" We've all heard that before, I know. "I want to have my contractor give people in the Tenderloin the opportunity to learn a building trade and to build this resource center for themselves." She ran through a program. She entrusted us to take over the design and the building of this facility. She also impressed upon us a sense of urgency, one that definitely informed the design process and our approach to training and having unskilled laborers on the project. You probably can't read that, but I'm going to read it to you. We documented the design of this project basically in our book, TARC. And we wrote, it's over the text here, alienation, fragmentation of communities, and the formulation of new communities. Information becomes a new tool in the redefinition of a gathering place, a new way to form commonalities among people in a location where information has been scarce. The facility will help fight AIDS by becoming an anchor in the community, a source of information, stability, and support. So here now I get to use these tools. I never lecture like this, so this is actually really great. I really do feel like a professor. Okay, new offices, spaces were clustered along one side of the wall. So these are the offices here along one side of the wall. Okay. The opposite wall was left unencumbered, so it was a double height wall along here, which emphasizes the height and proportions of the space. The eye is drawn up to the skylights. They have these two completely covered over amazing skylights very deep into the plan. So the eye was drawn up to the skylights through the orchestration of the stepping walls. You'll see this in another photograph leading you up to the skylights, and by a diagonal light beam, which is depicted here, and a vertical light pole in the back right here. They were all sort of leading you up to these skylights. And that vertical light pole was just simply a vertical ABS stack pipe with track light mounted on it. And here's the facility looking down from the mezzanine. So by exploiting the color and texture of inexpensive building materials, such as laminate, vinyl tile, oriented strand board, and stock lumber and hardware, the space was enlivened without going over the budget. These proved to be an unexpected boom for our relatively unskilled helpers in that they were familiar and comfortable with the materials, which offered a degree of confidence in their ability to actually build TARC. The very few amenities we had to take advantage of, such as the previously covered skylights or the lofty ceiling proportions, previously hidden by a ubiquitous dropped acoustical ceiling tile, were critical for us to uncover. The diagonal light beam, there you can see it here. The diagonal light beam, with a light track mounted along the top of the beam to light both the offices and the large volume of space above, was at once intentionally awkward, and frankly, it was extremely dynamic in the space. It activated it and made the lighting of the space affordable with scant resources. In other words, this whole thing lit the whole space. Texts were inscribed in the design itself, such as the reception desk detail depicted here. Here's our book once again. We wrote verisimilar, having the appearance of truth, probable. The column doesn't support the weight, it just holds itself up. Rather, one thin line, a cable in tension, holds things together. And accompanying the description is a quotation of Bernard Tschumi, which says, "Architecture is the representation of the dominant social order and serves to maintain the status quo." And of course, for us, these companion messages underscored our concern that the government failed to sufficiently address the demands of the AIDS crisis by supporting those most affected. The use of such quotidian building materials was built up, expressed lap joints that celebrated the hardware, stock lumber, and veneers, enabled us to celebrate the commonalities which bound us all together under such extraordinary, trying circumstances. A pivotal subtext and metaphorical dialogue surrounding materiality belied the contested tensions held by oppositional notions of structure and veneer as they related to issues endemic to TARC. And again, from our book, we set up this dialogue between veneers and structure that became very, very integral to the design. Veneer being, of course, a thin sheet of material, a layer of wood, of superior value or excellent grain to be glued to an inferior wood. Or 2, a protective or ornamental facing, as in brick or stone. 3, a superficial or deceptively attractive material in appearance or display. We thought these were very funny descriptions, frankly, of what a veneer was, as opposed to structure, which was the action of building something arranged in a definite pattern of parts, an organization, and a matter of making it together. So we had these ideas where we had these oppositions, such as structure and veneer, framework versus surface, rough versus finished, thick versus thin, inferior versus superior, truth versus deception, deep versus superficial, makeup versus gloss, and vital versus opulent. And we chose to kind of turn them on their head because we sought to problematize these oppositions and blur their boundaries in the design. You know, it's without question that the life and death urgency of AIDS crisis overshadowed the design. But at the same time, I would assert that design played a pivotal role in contributing to mobilizing the community to brace itself for the worst. At a time of extreme stigmatization of the LGBT community before this collective tagline was institutionalized, of those most affected in the tenderloin, such as the drug users and prostitutes, the communities at the time that were most affected by the spread of AIDS, TARC became a beacon for the sick and for those in need. Here's a sketch, early sketch of the entry desk that now built here, of course, and photographed here, along with the lighting that we designed, and we'll talk more about that later, but we've designed a lot of lighting. And it was fabricated for this project, and then, of course, became then the cover photo for Interior Design magazine. It was published in a number of other locations. And Glenda Hope had to defend this, ironically, because it was deemed to be unnecessary. Design was deemed to be unnecessary. Expenditure of $60,000. But she said all people are worthy of our best efforts. Okay, moving on. Within the past several decades, I've been lucky. Oh, I have to go back. I skipped over something. I've designed and completed numerous work environments for advertising agents, fashion designers, and internet companies, and often have ended up designing total spaces, meaning furniture, lighting, clearly traversing the boundaries of numerous disciplines in order to accomplish the goals of the project. And so it was hard for me to kind of like decide which of these projects to talk about. I see it's cutting off part of the slide. But here's a sampling of the offices that all supported this approach to design. All of them appear to be, ironically, if you look at this, sort of equally dated by, I'll pull this out again, equally dated by the monitors in each one. I decided I will never do that again. I will never put a monitor in there because it gets dated so quickly. But for Quokka Sports was the top center. We custom designed all the furnishings and partitions. For C Advertising on the right, they loved it so much they said, we want the same thing all in white. So we designed a whole new furniture system for them in white. And for OWN and P down here at the bottom, we designed all the custom display racks for all of their advertising and also their furnishings. But I'm gonna come back to Quokka Sports primarily, and I want to say that it's housed in a building at 525 Brannan Street, of which my studio practice too will enjoy this part of it because it's the site of their project this semester. But I have a long history with this building. I was part of the original design group for the project, and it's both buildings, this building and this building. And I just want to focus, and I've designed numerous projects for different tenancies over the years in this building. So this is there's some shots of that project. And here is the ground floor space before the project started, before Quokka Sports moved in to the warehouse space. And it was a real dark space, really dingy. It really was not that great. But it became Quokka Sports, and the design for Quokka Sports, for those of you that don't know about this firm because it no longer exists, it was one of the original and first internet content sites that followed international sporting events such as the America's Cup race that's coming to San Francisco, of course, and other sporting events in real time with live feeds. And it grew into one of the largest publicly traded internet companies at the time before the bubble burst, and they burst along with it. But they were before their time, because there wasn't the bandwidth available really to follow these amazing events. There is now. The conference room here in the forefront here is a glass box entirely constructed of unistrut and glass panels. And the custom conference table here was made of carbon fiber, shaped as a very large surfboard with stainless steel north arrow. And it was fabricated by these amazing surfers in Santa Cruz. We had classic Herman Miller furnishings throughout, and the custom reception desk here that we designed for them out of recycled bottles and plywood. And programmatically, you know, they were early champions of some of the more common requirements for technology and social media company offices today. Flexibility and reconfigurable workstations were identified by the client as being paramount. And in addition, they needed to expand quickly. So they desired no private offices, no sense of hierarchy, and they wanted that to be the case across the entire ranks. And so to solve the design brief, we designed a custom work partition system that allowed for that flexibility. Here's an early sketch of that. So the distribution of building systems and infrastructure is always one of the challenges hampering flexibility. And in this design, the partitions rotate off the column here. They have these pillow blocks here, and they rotate. And the power runs overhead in raceways, and it runs down and into these raceways. Here you can see all the spaghetti wire there. And then they become docking stations here for people as these partitions rotate. And they can be the people could be reconfigured and move around for small groups of between 2 to 6 people per work group, and they could do it at will. So actually the space was really, really flexible because they could open it up like this or they could close it off for a really small group. So here's a time-lapse photography, a photograph of one of the rotatable fins. You can see it in the forefront. And moving these fins allowed people to gather quickly without having to, take the partitions apart and put them back together and rework all the electrical and all of those systems. So they were really happy with this. Of course, it has a rather static floor plan, but actually these are the columns. and all of these partitions move. So these were highly configurable spaces. This is that conference room in the front and the reception area with Brannan Street out here, and then some free spaces back here. But that's it. It's just, you know, just a lot of workstations. And then later on they had to expand, so we kept designing more and more furniture and moving them into other parts of the building. The materiality directly related to the company's focus on sports. So Kevlar sailcloth material separates one person from another. The tubular steel frame and wheels are reminiscent here of bike imagery. And the workstations themselves were designed as a system of parts with shelving and various privacy and storage components that could be added by individual workers. So the design of these workstations was then later licensed to a furniture manufacturer, and they produced and sold these designs across the country, and along with it, a line of lighting. So we realized that this kind of comprehensive approach to design demands that kind of attention if your clients are willing participants. So about the same time as we were working on TARC, this exercise and something completely different, we were commissioned to master plan and develop a 300-acre sustainable ranch in Sonoma. And we, of course, needed to define exactly what that meant at the time, as it predated the well-defined and organized assessment that exists today, such as LEED certification and those sorts of things. And I want to say that this went on for a 10-year period, so we had ample time to think about it. But as a working ranch, we organized and addressed all the infrastructure on the site, the solar field over here. We helped with the with the lake, the organic gardens over here, and we built this private residence. But we also built, the first building we built over here was the ranch operations, was the woodworking shop and the barn. So we had our hand all over this project in one way or another. But mainly it was this two-story rammed earth building that was nestled into the hillside. Here's the hillside here, so there was a cut made, and this was nestled up into the landscape. So you entered on this half landing, and then you walked down a grand staircase into a double-height living space, and the views of actually the Sonoma Valley are out this way, and of the lake and the pool. The form of the building was deeply rooted in rural Sonoma adobes, buildings from as early as the 1600s, frankly. Really simple, with its roomed scaled porches. I mean, deep overhangs, almost like 10, 12 feet. And intimate scaled rooms, even though it's a rather large building. These huge monolithic rammed earth piers. And of course, the developed floor plan, which shows dining room, double height living room, entry on the half landing, kitchen, informal dining, or family dining, I should say. Family room, two-car garage at the end. And here's the house across the lake, which belies its scale because when you entered on the half landing, you thought it was half as big as it really was. It was only in looking back at it that you could see how large the building really was. Here's a close-up. But we were very interested primarily in the sculptural potential of the various rammed earth piers that tapered in both plan and section, and the exploration of colored mixes of material at a large monolithic piers that were, really, frankly, undeniably powerful in terms of their scale and presence, but from both the interior and the exterior. And the investigations over a decade into the rammed earth and straw bale construction techniques, including the development of a two-story structural rammed earth house, took years of development, frankly, and on-site, hands-on experimentation. We would do this almost every weekend for a long time. And here's a circular stair that's formed completely out of rammed earth. So these early experiments developing this new construction methodology and techniques became part of a really early network of builders and owners and architects who were really plugging into this kind of rammed earth construction method. And Penelope Rollins, in her book, she highlighted it in Weekend's Home book. She focused here on the entry and some of these fissures that were, frankly, we left them in. They were sort of mistakes, but actually we sort of liked them. But I want to emphasize that all of the windows, doors, cabinetry, concrete, everything in this house was fabricated on site. And all of the wood was reclaimed from old bridges and was utilized and remilled and used in some way within this building. But as you can imagine, after working on this for such a long time, we were evolving our own critique of the movement, burgeoning movement, and of our own participation in it, which led to the authoring of Dirt Manifesto, which you see on the right, which was published in Architectural Record, and became sort of our own critique of the times, which now has sort of evolved into the sustainability movement. And for any of you, it's too long to read here, but I do have it, and I'm happy to share the manifesto with you. I read it today, and it was pretty interesting to look back on it after so much time. I've decided to include this project here. It's one I've been working on for the past couple of years. I don't have finished photographs of it yet. The landscaping part of the project is still being developed. But it's a parcel in Sonoma and Glen Ellen where we designed several factory-built prefab structures as weekend guest cottages for family members and friends. So that's why I wanted to include it. A little bit about the site. It's a beautiful parcel, actually. You enter down here. Oh, good, that didn't get cut off. And you come up this road through the vineyards here, and you arrive over here where the project site is located. So we were looking out after these views. And just sort of a close-up view of our project site. You can see the main house and the guest house here, but we had this whole clearing area where we were going to build these pods, we called them. But we also had a stream that we had setbacks for, and it's ironic given the size and scale of this parcel, that was where we had to build, period. That was it. So it became very constrained very quickly in terms of site conditions. So what we did is, here's that main house, guest house as well. We connected those two buildings together. And we stair-stepped down these pods, and one over here too, which each are bedrooms, and this one's a communal kitchen and dining area. And these were really used for her family and her kids and her guests and people like that. Here's a picture of the site. And here's these pods being fabricated in the factory. I think the benefit here was that the construction time on the site was greatly reduced by having the factory build these pods to our custom specifications. A project that would have taken a year and disrupted their lives because they lived there part-time took about 4 months. So it cut it almost more than in half. And in addition to that, the buildings were constructed on chassis that were literally driven to the site, where the wheels were removed and they were placed on permanent foundations on the site. And here's just a digital image. The steel piers that they were placed upon, they were developed into decks, like out here, that were skirted, and making them thereby permanent. And all told, this construction project and this method of building saved the client about $500,000 in construction costs by using these technologies. And so I'm looking forward to the landscaping being complete so that I can get some photographs of the finished project. But I wanted to come back to this. I couldn't find the right spot for it, but I thought it was important to add this because I think that it's a Buckminster Fuller quote, and for those of you that haven't seen his show at the museum, you should check it out. But it's about the idea of radical technical innovation as really being necessary for us in this day and age to solve some of the problems that we face. Okay, so next project. There's a rich legacy in California that I've tapped into that speaks to other kindred spirits and has led me to uncover sort of these subterranean narratives in architecture. These are often, frankly, not discussed very much or ignored or neglected altogether. But while I was at UCLA's Architecture and Urban Design program, I became acquainted with the under-recognized work of Gregory Ain, an architect with a regional cult following in Los Angeles. This project here, the Avenel Housing Cooperative, was built in 1949 for 10 families after World War II who pooled their resources and hired Gregory Ain to design their cooperative living experiment. So the simplicity and elegance of this plan was something that he worked on for years. It's 1,000 square feet, and very simply, there's an entry here, a kitchen with a connected dining room to the living area and the view of an open patio. There's basically 3 bedrooms here, here, and here, and 2 small bathrooms. There's these large sliding walls that divide the space. So you'll see in future photos, these are open and these can be open, which makes it far more expansive than it really is at 1,000 square feet. But these spaces, I was really pretty captivated by them at the time. I thought they were quite wonderful. Oops. And here's a rendering of Ains of the backyard area of these projects. But again, he envisioned them as very open, indoor-outdoor California living. This is the site plan for the Avenel project, and it's ingenious, frankly. There's 5 rows of townhomes this way, 5 rows here. The street's out here. So when you walk to your unit, you walk down this long path, and every entry into the space is quite private. And it's zoned for maximum sound privacy, not only from the other residents, because this is on a higher level than this, but also from the street, where there's very little noise. So this early photograph of Julia Schulman shows the resident Dorothy Brandt here, and her children walking down the walkway towards their home. Dorothy and her husband, who is now 101 years old, they still live there. And they've lived there since 1949. And they were part of the original group that worked with Gregory Ain to design Avenel Terrace. And here it is today, the same view, the same sighting from Julius. And you turn and you walk towards the door, and you walk around this curving wall that screens the utility area into the front area and the front door, and looking out towards the view and the view beyond. So I'm going to show you a series of before and after photos. And here's a before picture showing the original living room, and here's these sliding doors, that indoor-outdoor. And here's another space that has a large sliding door along that track to divide this space from this space. And here it is after the walls have been, taken down, far more glass than there was before. And here's the original kitchen. The wall separates the kitchen. This wall here was never intended to be part of Ain's design. He was never happy with this, but he was forced to build it this way by the FHA or risk losing funding from them to build the entire project. So he never allowed it to be photographed or published as built. He always showed the original design as he intended it. And here's a photograph of the kitchen before and after. You can see how small it is, but you have the same windows. And you can see here's the dining room table. Oops. And here's the dining room table as Ain imagined it between the spaces. This was actually considered radical in 1949. It's kind of hard to believe. And the open living room beyond. And in the back living room or bedroom areas, these are open again between the 2 back bedrooms, and here's that track. Oops. And after it's completed. Before in that rear bedroom, and then a decision to open that up and add a door going out into a private garden. Okay, so what did happen to Ain? Of course, this is the topic of the Bauhaus Ranch, which is a cross-disciplinary media project by director and professor Christian Robbins. And as a producer and collaborator on this project, I've interviewed a number of people who've crossed paths with Ain. And I'd like to show a preliminary sampling of the film that was originally selected for the AIA's Festival of the City screening in 2010. There's Frank Gehry and Tom Main and Wolf Pricks and Julia Schulman, who are all interviewed. And Frank Gehry and Tom Main were students of Gregory Ain at USC. The film speaks not only to Ain's career, but to the evolving themes that frankly marginalized his practice at the time, themes that are now really on the forefront of what's being discussed today. Uncovering these architectural narratives made me realize, once again, the potential of architecture, frankly. And I do want to say that the project, the Bauhaus Ranch, was exhibited in the Guangzhou Design Biennale this year, in 2011. It was, it's interesting because the premise of that exhibition is called Named Design, Design as Total Environment. And they did a whole piece on Gregory Ain, including this, this project. So let's, because of time, let's hope and pray that we can get this up and running here and just show you this film clip. It's about 15, 20 minutes. Here's the exhibition in Korea, the Biennale. And these cast of characters over here, you're going to see them in the film momentarily, hopefully, if we can get this up and running. Okay. You can turn off the lights, I guess, and turn up the volume.
Do you know who Gregory Ain is? Have you heard of Gregory Ain? Do you know who Gregory Ain is?
Gregory Ain, no idea.
Gregory Hain?
No. Oops.
I don't, and I probably should know.
No, I don't.
How do you spell it?
A-I-N.
I do not. You know, I don't.
What was the question?
Is he a case study person?
I know who Ames.
No, Ain, A-I-N.
Yeah, no, I don't know.
We're working on a film called 1,000 Square Feet, and we're asking people tonight if they know who Gregory Ain is.
No.
Do you know who Richard Neutra is?
Neutra, I know. He has drawings down in LA that my boss William, who runs the bookstore, was really stoked about.
I don't. Maybe he does.
Yeah, I do.
Yes. He does.
Of course. What, do you want me to tell you who he was?
Are you going to tell us?
Marketing study firm.
Who is Gregory Ain?
I think it was in 1935 that he went out on his own. And by the end of the 30s, he had created a name for himself and had a bit of a following. I mean, he went out with gusto. As soon as he left Neutra's office, and it does look like Neutra helped him with a couple of jobs, and then somehow Gregory did get his first single-family house, the Edwards house. I mean, he really hit his stride right away. He got notoriety and he got business. I'm sure he would have liked more, but usually it takes a young architect quite a while to build up a reputation. In his youth, he really did have a great sense of confidence.
When I lived in LA for a while in the mid-'80s, you saw that Ain and all these other architects in LA who were building mainly houses. They were definitely inspired by that, by the Bauhaus and the international style and all that. But they took it another step further, and they adapted it to the California climate, and they did it on a scale that wasn't wasn't scary or well, fascistic. It was more human, light in areas. It was kind of these pavilions in this Mediterranean landscape. And that seemed like, when I saw that, I thought, well, this is where this architecture belongs. It doesn't really belong in Germany. It doesn't really belong in New York. It belongs here. It's found a home here, and it works better here on this scale than I think anywhere else. To some extent, we saw in that era, and a little while after, we'd see pictures in Life magazine and in other places of what the future looked like, what modern architecture was, what modern living was going to be transformed by this architecture. And they had pictures of houses in California and Europe, and they were all the sleek, modern approach. And that seemed to be, inevitably, that's what the future is going to be. It's going to be light and airy, for certain.
California is such a new place that almost anything feels freer here because you don't have that overlay of cultures. This is a new culture. There's so much that you see now here in the LA area that has its roots in modernism. It didn't have to fight against anything. So it's not revolutionary, as modern architecture was in Europe and then later on in the East Coast, certainly.
Julius got the one moment, this beautiful photograph that became an icon of literally, if you just look at photographs of what LA is, that's going to show up as one of the icons of this is Los Angeles. It captures a moment of time of progress, the 50s in the United States, of the image of Los Angeles, of the vastness of the landscape, the city below you, up in the mountains, on and on. The openness of the building, the characters, I mean, everything about it. It's an icon of the time in history. LA and the US and the position of the US in the world. I mean, it keeps going, right?
I think he really believed that through architecture he could create a better life for people, and I think that was the mission. Housing should be a right of everybody's. And I think somewhere he did say not just a privilege of the upper class.
In 1947, from my understanding of what all these folks were trying to accomplish, I think that they had a vision that they could find a way to live in a better way that was not the conventional way of doing things at the time after World War II. When they built the place, it was very conscious that they wanted a modernist design, because to them it did have the rights, it spoke the right words about what they were about. It was progressive, it was new, it was something that wasn't conventional, and that was what they were all about.
Someone knew Gregory Ain well. They knew his political and moral viewpoints, and they said this would be a good architect because he builds the type of house that we want to live in. He's not the type of builder that builds fancy homes, spectacular property. He likes to build inexpensive homes for families.
Like any good solution is going to be, it's going to deal with the basics. It's going to deal with the family unit. It's going to deal with how we live together practically in a convenient way, unfettered by preconceptions. I mean, he was looking at designing everything in terms of a very rigorous module, a 4-foot or 4-foot by 8-foot module, so there would be a minimum of waste of materials. There was the idea of how could you reduce the area to absolute minimum that would accommodate a family of 4, 1,000 square feet or a little bit under when it was originally built.
And how prescient is that now? I mean, we're living in a time now where that should be the gold standard.
I think he always thought cost effectively in his design, which inhibits design in a way. That was what he was hammered with at MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, that for low-cost housing it wasn't as cheap as buying a Levitt home.
Gregory had been acquainted with Philip Johnson, who then was head of the Museum of Modern Art Architectural Division. He said, "Julius, I respected Gregory's work. I saw in this young man a great talent. And I asked him, would he design a model house? And it's breathtaking to me to realize that somebody I knew was becoming so acclaimed. That little house he designed for the museum became very popular."
These houses, somewhat idealistically and maybe naively, they really made you want to live in a slightly different way.
he was a dreamer. It's fabulous. He truly believed in the social potential and in the utopian dream that was rooted in the modernist project, and then of course especially through Schindler. The fact that it came through Schindler, it makes the pieces fit together a lot easier. And then the fact you realize he came already from a family that was embedded in socialism, and it's not a very hard reach to understand this is who this guy was. He didn't have the realism and the political toughness, which is the other part of architecture. If he was here today, I would go, well, would you want to change your values? Of course not. You know who you are. You made conscious choices of those values that you espouse and that you live by. And now it's the reality of living by the consequences of those values. And you're not a kid anymore. You understand the cost of believing something.
Ain didn't really get the kinds of commissions that one would have expected him to get for someone who'd had this this incredible talent and even exposure at this point. And there is this talk, of course this was happening in the 1950s, that he was a victim of the blacklisting, and very unfortunate for everybody involved.
There was a period that this project went through that was very, very unpleasant for many people. Many people, as I said, one was an official in the union, school teachers, people that the FBI knew their names and hounded them. I don't think there was another group in the city, collective group, that was hounded as this group was here at the project.
John and Tenzer began to publicize in 1945 his new program, centered on Arts and Architecture magazine, helping after the post-war years to instrument low-cost housing, available housing to people who couldn't afford to hire expensive architects. We said that Gregory Ain was a man very instrumental in developing a program for low-cost housing. And Tenzer responded by saying, no, Gregory Ain has surrounded himself with clients who are communists.
You also have to understand that Entenz's project was to sell modernism to industry. So, you know, if you're trying to pitch this kind of architecture to mainstream capital in the United States, you don't want to sully your program with a socialist architect. Let's think of it this way. All of these reforms that all of these people were advocating, which today would sound like just complete, you know, no-brainer sensibility. You know, childcare, health insurance, public parks, integrated with your housing. These simple ideas that make so much common sense, independent of ideology, were ideological ideas in the 40s.
Greg Ain was the first guy I ran into in college, in the university, who was albeit a father figure, who was doing buildings that I could look at and relate to and feel that they were beautiful in spite of their social leanings or whatever kind of comment they were making on the community or whatever, that they were damn beautiful and they were carefully thought out. And he talked about it, he elevated it to an art. I loved him, times 10. I mean, the guy was, he opened my heart and to the world. And I think the message has not much to do with his political leanings or my political leanings. It has to do with the profession of architecture as an art, and that the parking it totally in just the social issues is denying it the possibility of having masterpieces like the other arts have.
does the idea come from to make a movie about Gregory Ain? There must be something in the air, and it's good to hear that, because in my opinion, architecture will, the discussion of architecture will change into in this direction. With other vocabulary, with other methods, with other, let's say, outspoken, formal answers, but the question he put into architecture, how can we survive in our artificial environment called the city?
We should thank the filmmaker. I hope she's here in the audience. She should be anyway. So tonight, I just want to end on one project and take questions or move on to other things. But this is a project that I'm currently working on, and it's in construction. And it's a house in Napa, California, that was originally designed by architect Jack Hilmer in 1953. And in a similar way to Gregory Ain, Hilmer's work is both engaging, beautiful, and overlooked. His work is the subject of a chapter in this recent book by Alan Hess called Forgotten Modernism. It's perfectly named for that, where his Napa property, amongst two others, are highlighted. And here's the spread showing in the book. Right here, that's the building itself, and some of the original plans for the property. It's on a little over an acre of land. It has a old pool, and you know, it's deeply nestled into the hill western side, so it's sort of sheltered in many ways. Right here, in an original floor plan of Hilmer's, who by the way taught architecture at UC Berkeley for over a decade, he just constructed only 10 buildings in his career, and all of them are quite frankly amazing, as I've come to realize, knowing more and more about him. And what I think is interesting is I had a similar experience with Gregory Ain, and sort of I wanted to know more and more. Well, I'm learning more and more about Hilmer. You know, he was inspired by Schindler. Lived in a Schindler in Los Angeles, clearly Frank Lloyd Wright. But he had his own ideas that he pursued with rigor and passion, and he had a love particularly of redwood, and specifically unfinished redwood. So here I am poring over some plans at a site meeting recently. I'm going to show you some working drawings, because I don't have presentation drawings yet, but it really features a folded plate ceiling that undulates and hovers over the plan, and you can see that it rises and falls. And in this way, he strongly influenced John Lautner, who was familiar with him and this project. But the north and west walls that face the street, which are, oops, let's see if I can get this running. Oh, I think this might have given out on me. Oh no, here we go. Oh, just gave out on me. The two lower drawings here are fabricated of custom CMU blocks that form privacy from the street, and they have a ribbon band of windows that meets the ceiling. The other side of the building, the top two elevations, are floor-to-ceiling plate glass with large redwood posts. And the building has these deep 4 to 7 foot canopies that are cantilevered and surround the entire building. The plan, you enter through the telescoping CMU walls at the entry, and it expands and opens up to the view of the Napa Mountains beyond. And this is a living room, and it probably shouldn't be called a living room because that whole space around the kitchen area there is various forms of free space. And it's used for both summer and winter living. And I've come to realize that, you know, the building has tremendous thermal mass, so it actually is capturing heat and radiating it out in the evening. But it also has an office and 2 bedrooms that are separated by these unusual hexagonal showers and bathrooms that are depicted in the middle. And so the house really is expressive of these 2 personalities, a kind of speaking kind of a curious melding of interiority and exteriority, which certainly expands upon the Southern California initiation of indoor-outdoor living, one which really works well up in Napa. Doesn't quite work well in San Francisco, but it certainly works up there. Again, sort of riffing on the legacy of Southern California, such as Schindler and Ain, Hilmer's design offers a respite and privacy, and arguably even protection from the street, as it was constructed of these monolithic CMU walls that you see surrounding half of the building. The building's also situated to maximize solar heat gain in the winter and remain cool without air conditioning in the summer, and it's aided by these large overhangs, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm just going to go through these a little bit. These are the designs of these bathrooms that we're working on right now. The showers in the center, the separate water closet, and the sink outside of them. They're just all made out of redwood panels. So when you're taking a shower, you feel like you're in a redwood tree. And I don't think you can see this so well, but this is the ceiling plan. So these lines represent the ceiling planes as they undulate through the overhead. Oops, we already saw that. So here's a before picture of the view facing west and south out of the east towards the mountains beyond, which is very private. And here is the street view, which is very protected. These are all before pictures. I don't have any finished pictures quite yet, only maybe one. And then here's the north facade, which is sort of halfway between. So the building had fallen into considerable disrepair from neglected maintenance primarily, especially the redwood, which is oxidized and blackened over the years, that fascia board, for example, or the damage because of woodpeckers and bees that have taken up residence in the structure because of neglect. And also, you know, serious wood damage to the building from insensitive work and missing thresholds and cat doors, and it was really something, I'll tell you. This large redwood cabinet here in the picture has been removed because it was blocking the entry from opening up to the view, and it created a dark hallway and dark rooms in the back. But we've salvaged all the wood, and we're repurposing all the wood and redesigning it into new cabinets in the kitchen and in the baths and other areas of the project. And you notice the black concrete floor tiles. They were fabricated by the owner, who, by the way, built this over a 10-year period himself. And they are intended, of course, to soak up the heat during the day and radiate it out during the night, even though it has a radiant heating flooring system. And here they are sort of taking apart that cabinet, which is interesting because you can sort of see that as they keep moving through it, it gets better and better. But you can also see here the sort of dynamism of the redwood ceiling and its vaulted ceiling that frames the landscape. It really, truly embodies California living. It's a house really that only could be built in California in an odd sort of way, and probably would never be built again because of the redwood. It's very difficult to even find any new redwood that we need without a huge expense. So it makes you feel the sort of preciousness of this building in general. And here they are sort of taking it all apart, and they're sort of revealing the entry door now, which is being redesigned so that it does open up to the view. And just 2 more shots here. This is the view looking out, and if you notice that white fence, this was all existing before shots, but we've taken that wall and we've turned it into a light wall. So we've added these panels and LED lights so that at night it becomes more of an entertaining space. with the light pockets. And so basically this project is to be continued because it is a work in progress. So in a couple of months we hope to have more photographs and to be finished. So with that I conclude my talk, and thank you very much. Because I'm constantly energized by all of you. And I mean that quite literally. It's a privilege.
Is the medical clinic still in use?
It actually is. It is. It has been transfigured. It does not look the same any longer. And which is always a good reason to get photographs. And I've heard this from many people, and it's true. You know, you lose control of these things after a while, and so after about a decade, they changed it. They had a transgendered program move in, and they opened up the wall to the space next door, and a whole new cast of characters showed up. And so, you know, I've been there, and there's you know, hints of it, of the original, but it's really quite different, unfortunately.
Did the materials in that 10-year period, did you feel that they held up? I mean, I know you used very reasonable.
Some of them did, yeah. But, you know, and they did not have the capacity to take care of them in some cases. So, you know, it was a little rough and tumble. But at the same time, they were very common materials, so they held up pretty well, actually. Considering they weren't precious in any way. So it's kind of a double-edged sword because it gives the message that, you know, it's okay to bang them around, but at the same time they actually did hold up fairly well.
On the last project, why was it so run down? The last project yours run down?
Neglect. It had the original family lived in the house until about 10 years ago, and and well into their 90s again. They sold the property, and unfortunately the prior owner just let it, you know, maintenance, deferred maintenance, one thing after the next. You could kind of see it happening. Just really, really didn't take long to be reclaimed. And apparently not. Apparently not. Yes?
So you seem to be championing these unfairly forgotten architects. Do you have other people on your list?
Do I have any other people on my list? No, you see, this is the thing. I just sort of come upon them. I wish, maybe I should start a list. I mean, maybe that would be an interesting approach. It's an interesting thing to kind of, you know, run into an architect, but literally that's what happened in this case. It opens up new doors and new avenues. I mean, actually, it's been very interesting to meet the architect who knew him, who has his archives, which they're trying to move into the Berkeley, UC Berkeley at this point. But we had a look at them, and they're really quite extraordinary. And so we're meeting a whole new network of people that are very much interested in, you know, maintaining a kind of interest in his work. It's hard, though, when you only have designed 10 buildings. You know, it puts a lot of pressure on them all to be good. But actually, the ones that we've become familiar with are really quite amazing. Yes?
Do you think TARC was a project that really got you to be the designer that you are, like, get your, to really understand where you wanted to go as a designer? Was TARC the one that really made you hit the ground running with your whole design purpose? Or?
In looking back on it, it certainly fulfilled what I had hoped or expected of that project, and I'm glad you brought that up, because there were projects that followed on the heels of some of these. I spoke of only a few of them, but one of them that followed on the heels of that was the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation. They did housing in the whole Tenderloin area, and so we designed their offices. And again, you know, these projects sort of predated that type of organized approach. I mean, Glenda Hope, she was like, here, do it, you know. But now, even when you donate your services, you know, it's highly regulated, and you don't have the freedom that we probably had. And you know, we have certainly exploited it, but we really wanted to try to see if we could push design in that context. I think in some of the other projects that we undertook, we equally tried to do the same. And it was always certainly, and has been, an interest of mine. Even in school projects and the pedagogy of the studios, like the linkage studios and things, I've always tried to, you know, bring that issue to the forefront.
As a woman practicing in the field, how have you seen things change for women in architecture and design?
Who are you? No, I can't see you. Well, they've gotten better and they've gotten worse, in my opinion. It's a little bit of both, I would say. I don't know if I should expand upon that and walk into that territory, so I don't think I will, but sign of the times that we live in.
What advice do you have for women in the design field as they try new projects and go into the design community today?
Advice. Be strong, be confident, really, really try to pursue what you believe in, and stay faithful to that. It's, you know, when you're young and you're starting out and you have to go work for firms, of course you don't always have that luxury, but when you can express yourself, even in those contexts, you know, make your voice known. I think that's really important for women. Was that? Yes.
What do you feel has been the common thread for you through all of this body of work?
Well, as I hoped to pull together these streams early on, I mean, it's about a sort of social responsibility and also a real interest in sustainability. It seems to be a thread that runs through a number of the projects that are defined in unique and slightly different ways than perhaps the dominant projects that we see built today, but they are there. Oh, one more. Is that okay, Amy? Okay.
Is there a particular architect that you like the most, or not that you like the most, but that you somewhat identify with his architectural philosophy, and that if the answer to that is yes, that you have a particular architect, has that influenced your work throughout time?
My gosh, these are good questions. These are really good questions. I love architecture. I love buildings. And so when I come across a designer or an architect that makes me feel a certain way in my body, you know, makes me appreciate a landscape or makes me appreciate the spaces that they've designed, I just really love that. So you ask me who does that? Well, probably all the people that were interviewed in this film have done that for me in one way or another. I consider them all to be, you know, the leaders in the profession, ironically. And of course, I think that I certainly have been inspired by Gregory Ain. It's been interesting sort of to design very small, compact spaces and have to think about the issues in much the same way that he did. I think I have a lot of favorites. I'm sorry. It's a long way of answering that question.
Do you have any women architects now that you admire? I haven't seen any. I mean, from this, are there?
Well, I love Zahid. Zaha Hadid, sorry. particularly, I really am fond of her work.
Anybody else? Because I know her too, but maybe there's some I don't know. Anybody else?
Well, there's a number of them sitting in the room right here.
I hear these names and they're mostly, I guess I'm not really up on architecture, but I don't hear a lot of women, you know.
Well, you know, it's interesting. In that time period, there were very few. Esther McCoy, who wrote The Second Generation, and you know, she was actually an architectural apprentice who worked in Schindler's office and wrote a book that included Ain. I mean, she talked a lot about that. I mean, there was a lot of struggles in that time period. And whoever's in the back, I can't see you, who asked about that. I mean, clearly women have entered the profession and have gone through architecture and design schools and interior design programs, and so you know, it's populated by women right now. Have any of them risen up to those ranks? You know, I don't know. That's questionable. It's still male-dominated in many ways, but they're there, and they will continue to be there. And it's certainly having an impact on design, without question. Thank you.